Good day, everyone. How are you all doing? Before we start, I would like to introduce myself. I am Juicy-sensei and I will be discussing two articles. And the first one is the Communicative Legacy in Language Tests. This is written by Glenn Fulcher in 2000. So, this article looks at the phenomenon of communicative language testing as it emerged in the 1970s and early 1980s as a reaction against tests constructed of multiple choice items and the perceived overemphasis on reliability. If you can see a man here, this is Robert Lado, and he actually became a target for communicative testers. It is argued that many of the concerns of the communicative movement had already been addressed outside the UK, and that this man, Lado, was done an injustice. Nevertheless, the jargon of the communicative testing movement has impacted the way in which language tests approach problems today. Spolsky in 1976 suggested that the history of language testing could be divided into three distinctive periods. The first one, we have the scientific. The second is the psychometric structuralists. And the third is the psycholinguistics, sociolinguistic. And Morrow actually translated these periods into the Garden of Eden, the Vale of Tears, and the Promised Land, wherein this Promised Land is actually the advent of communicative language testing at the end of the 1970s and the early 1980s. But what was communicative language testing? The approach was primarily a rejection of the role that reliability and validity had come to play in language setting, mainly in the US during 1960s. The key targets to attack communicative language testers were the multiple choice item as embodied in the test of English as a foreign language. Morrow characterized reliability as the search for objectivity, conveniently ignoring that Lado made between reliability and scoreability. He claimed that, with the exception of face validity, the whole concept of validity is circular because it only exists in terms of criteria, all of which are relative and based upon questionable assumptions. It was the task of communicative language testers to redefine reliability and validity. And in order to do this, they latched onto Davis' argument that there was a tension between reliability and validity, and defined validity as the parallelism of real world activities and test tasks. This means that the validity involved making the test truer to real world situations. Yet, reliability could only be increased through using objective item types like multiple choice. As you see, Underhill mentioned in 1982 that there's no real life situation in which we go around asking or answering multiple choice questions, right? We only do that usually at school. Like as I remember when I was in college, we have that departmental exam where we are expected to um, answer multiple choice questions. So the buzzwords of early communicative language testing soon became real life tasks: face validity, authenticity, and performance. Perhaps popular communicative language testing was neither a revolution nor evolution, but a rebellion against the perceived lack of concern for the individual, which is the human, the subject taking the tests. Morrow, 1979, claimed that there were specific criteria that could be used to tell if a test is communicative. In an early commentary, Alderson 1981 argued that communicative language testers had failed to show the following. First is how traditional language tests fail to incorporate these criteria, and the second is how the criteria could be incorporated into communicative language tests. Nevertheless, these criteria and the associated buzzwords have left a legacy in language testing research because of the wide acceptance of the communicative approach. So, what is communicative tests? This involves three types, which are performance, authentic, and it's scored in on real life outcomes. So for the performance, test takers should actually have to produce language. And for the interaction based, there will be actual face to face oral interaction, which involves not only the modification of expression and content, but also an amalgam. So, what is an amalgam? It's actually a combination or mixture of something, or which is the amalgam of receptive and productive skills. The third one, we have unpredictability. Um, this is wherein the language used in real time interaction is really unpredictable. And Hargreaves in 1987 reported that the main problems associated with integrative tasks in language tests were standardization and scoring. Furthermore, reliability is associated with test length, and tests with integrated tasks may therefore need to be analyzed in new and innovative ways. Then we have the communicative tests are authentic. For the purpose, the test takers must be able to recognize communicative purpose and be able to respond appropriately. For the authenticity, inputs and prompts in the language tests should not be simplified for the learner. Last is the context. Language will vary from context to context. Some talk will be appropriate in one context and not the other. The test taker must therefore be tested on his or her ability to cope with the context of situation, considering the physical environment, the status of the participants, the degree of formality, and expressing different attitudes, as well as linguistic content. Then we have the communicative tests are scored in real life outcomes. The only real criterion of success in language tests is the behavioral outcome, or whether the learner was able to achieve the intended communicative effect. When the students are asked to perform a task, it is essential to state what it is that the raters are measuring. In conclusion, despite the British communicative testing movement, much current research in language testing may have developed. The ideology associated with the early British communicative movement has had a pervasive influence on the ethos of teaching, learning, and testing around the world. It would really be difficult to market a new large scale test which does not really claim to be communicative. And the positive legacy of the movement as a whole can be seen in all the research that concerns itself with the definitions of tasks, of context, and the relationship between test tasks and the target language use situation, especially in testing language for specific purposes. We're done with the first article, and let's go with the second one, which is the impact of the CFR on teaching and testing English in the local context by Jana Beresova. In Slovakia, ELT went through several significant changes in the 1990s as English used to be taught in the same way as Russian. So, actually, in Slovakia, Russia is an obligatory language in the country. And Slovak teachers focus too much on native like pronunciation, memorizing isolated words and grammatical patterns that is similar to English teachers in other countries of Central and Eastern Europe. The way of teaching is so traditional, where students are passive observers of the teacher's explanation. Well, as I was reading this context, I actually remembered the Philippine educational system. You see, the traditional teacher centered approach colonized the Philippine system for a very long time, and we cannot deny that. And it's still being practiced by some of the teachers in today's system. Mhm. So, with the increasing awareness that passive response of the students during the teaching sessions become one of the reasons why students lose their interest in attending school, which is according to Lagwador 2014 study, little by little, the teaching style is being diverted into the student-centered teaching style due to the implemented new curriculum. Okay, let's go with the next one. So, despite the fact that Slovakia had a uniform system in which everything was managed centrally, for example, syllabuses, methods, the same course books, learning outcomes were not really measured centrally. The CEFR, or the Common European Framework of Reference, Learning, Teaching, Assessment, introduced a general model of language use based on an action oriented approach. And the traditional four skills, which are listening, reading, speaking, writing, were replaced by communicative language activities such as reception, that includes oral and visual, production, it's oral and written, interaction, oral and written, and mediation. So in Slovakia, the pilot version of CFR encouraged teachers to change their approach to teaching English and subsequently to teaching to testing. Now, the descriptors used in the Slovak national curriculum are formulated as can do statements and influence the development of the test specification for school leaving examinations in English, taking into account the local context and educational history. For the methodology, the process of reform in teaching and testing English was initiated from the bottom as Slovak teachers of English using English course books printed in Great Britain changed their way of teaching, focusing more on communicative language activities. The teachers have intensively trained by lectures from the British Council or by a local teacher trainers who were engaged in the projects related to the CFR. The first test in English was designed in 1997 and piloted on March 1997 at 40 secondary grammar schools with 1,000 students. The results were presented in the conference, and the reform got enormous attention from authorities. Since then, each year, a valid and reliable test in English was designed. And because of this, the Ministry of Education officially recognized language tests as part of the school leaving examination. In spite of the several changes, the students' language competencies in English is tested in the language tests that are available at three CFR levels, which are the B1, B2, and C1. And take a look at the table 1. This shows the three tests in English, all of which have the same sections concerning listening, language use, and reading. Each language skill is measured as authentically as possible using authentic texts and realistic tasks. As you can see in the table 2, it depicts slight differences between the tests of Croatia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Slovenia. In Croatia, Their English tests do not include an extra section that concerns to test grammar and vocabulary. Have a look at this part. They don't have language in use, and in that language in use, it actually includes grammar and vocabulary. But the creation of reading part consists of 5 tasks, which includes 2 tests measuring the language in use. So another findings we have here is that when comparing the test design in the 4 mentioned countries, it shows that the text chosen for 18 to 19 years old contain topics that are not really attractive for teenagers. These tests still need to train professionals that should be systematically led towards quality and improvement. Another thing, support from the Ministry of Education is really a necessity, as test developments actually are money consuming. We cannot deny that fact. Um, Another thing for the finding is that when comparing task designs, it revealed that the same section names cover different constructs. For example, the test constructed in Croatia, as what I've mentioned earlier, included one task concerning testing vocabulary. So, the last comparison of testing English reveals that testing spoken production and spoken interaction still needs a lot of reform. There is no evidence that objectivity and fairness or ethical behaviors of rater. So, in this part, a summary of the gaps that are recognized in the linking process between the countries. And these are first, the lack of quality assurance in high stakes testing in local contexts. Next, insufficient application of the action oriented approach. Third, limited awareness of the CFR descriptor and illustrative samples. Fourth, excessive focus on grammar and vocabulary rather than communicative language skills. Then we have the insufficient statistical data, no training for raters, and the last one is that there's no marking criteria. So, for the implications and suggestions, in testing English, item writers are encouraged to use the CEFR skills and illustrative descriptors to construct appropriate tests for that fit their context and maintain standards. So, in order to make sure that the examinations in English are aligned to the CEFR, several steps need to be followed, and these are the following. And that's the end of our topic. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.